Good evening to everybody. See, I think I am audible. Uh, I am with much pleasure actually participating in this program because I know that this is an international group of poets, readers, and critics, and there to give a talk, a simple talk on poetic language is uh, very much an appreciated thing. I think I am greatly honored with this invitation as well. So I am interested in Joseph Square because earlier I have even given a poem, uh, recited a poem in this group, and uh, a great number of members, great number of people in this group have shown interest uh, in that poem. So I am grateful to you that again I am invited to give a talk, a simple talk, some deliberation, that is all. No, don't not to call a talk, some deliberations on uh, the intricacies of language and poetry. Actually, when one of the admins of this group, Mr. Alan Cheria, when he told me that I have to give a talk on poetic language, actually he has decided this that poetic language and rather poetry and language. I think it is not necessary to go such a binary thing because poetry is basically a produce of language. It is a linguistic construct as well. So it is not necessary to consider poetry and language as separate entities. It is one and same. It is the same one entity. But in the modern perspective, rather with the development of literary criticism, analysis, literary theory, we can see that uh, linguistic approach, rather we say linguistic criticism, has developed much. And even today we have something like literary linguistics course. So I think when we consider poetry and language, as I have already told you, one and same, definitely we have to ponder over two aspects. One is poetry and the other the language. We know that poetry is basically a linguistic construct. It is a produce of language, any language, either English or Polish or German, whatever. So I think it is easy to consider poetry on the base of language. So first we have to consider what is language. See, it is not necessary to define language because all of you know what is language. All of you are writers, reviewers, critics, and readers. But the concept of language changed after 1960 with the advent of structuralism. You know that the concept, rather the approach to language, uh, changed completely. But even when approaches change, we see that the two main aspects of language are still prevailing. What are they? The sound and a thing. See, basically, language is a sound. Everyone should agree. But when we consider a word or a sentence or a production means any sentence or something like that. In language, we can see that language is actually a sound plus a thing. That means first we hear the sound. When we utter a word or when you read a poem, first we hear the sound. Our first approach is to the sound. Then the concept comes. So language is basically a sound plus a thing. Actually, it is given by a great linguist, a Swiss linguist, de Saussure, Ferdinand de Saussure. And actually, he said that language is not a form. It is a system. It is a system of like any other system. So language is very live. Language is reality. Language is relational also. See, he has given so many ideas. I am not going to such details because it is not necessary. Anyway, I want only one thing from his approach to language. That is, when we consider language as a system of science, as a general science, we can see that everything is a sign. See, we are reading a poem. It is an assemblage of signs. It is a confederation of signs. Then we can analyze signs. But we know that when we read a poem first, we are not going for the analysis, but we are for the appreciation. So, appreciation actually deals first with the sound scheme. As you know that the very origin of language is also connected to the sound scheme. So, poetry needs a live language. That is important. That means the originality of language we can see in poetry. Why? The reason is that, rather, it is not only that, it was very, from the very beginning, poetry was the art form we consider first. No. A pristine feature of language. Language in its flesh and blood, I say. Language needs flesh and blood we see in poetry. That is why poets are always concerned of the language. See, poets may actually meditate days and weeks for even sometimes for a word, for a silence, in a line. They may undergo so many confusions and tensions. See, we know that there is live language. Everybody has their own mother tongue. All these things are there. But rather still, the problem of language arises when you try to create a poem in a particular language. So that is the peculiarity of poetic language. Because poetic language is an entity in itself. It speaks its own language, nothing else. See, some people will argue that Poetry speaks the language of human beings. It speaks the language of nature. It speaks the language of other things. It's some Marxist-oriented people will argue that it speaks the language of proletariat class, working class. All these things are there. Even then, the pertinent question is that which language you adopt. That means the question is not English, French, German, Hindi, Malayalam. No, rather the poetic language. How you adopt a poetic language, rather. When you adopt a language for writing a poem, how far it is effective, that is the question first comes. See, from the classical time, it is evident. In classicism, the very great time of epic. See, nowadays there is even argument that epics are static. All these things are there. Let them go. But you see, even from classical time, language was the first concern in poetry. That is the thing. See, I remember since I am a teacher in English in a college, we usually teach students about the classical writings, medieval writings, approaches of Longinus, Horace, all these things. They are classical critics. Among them, Longinus was a great person. It is believed that he lived in 1st century AD. Actually, he was a person who tried to determine a particular language, that is a poetic language. He said that elevated language, sublime, elevated language of elevation, elevated language, that is sublime, his approach to poetry needs an elevated language. It is not ordinary language. But in the modern times, this aspect is challenged too much, well. But from elevated language, the aspect of elevated language actually has contributed much in the approaches to poetry later. For example, in medieval time, you know that poetry's main concern was scriptures, Bible, and all godly words, all these things. But I say, when we think of language, especially poetic language, I always remember a quote from Bible, Matthew Psalm. That's it. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Even those people who do not approve, that means logos-centered, they cannot approve logos-centered. That means there is a God at the center of the universe or where. That will be. Even nihilist people can appreciate the beauty of that sentence. The Word was God. Actually, medieval time, this has been approved too much. Rather, it has been determined and used too much. But we know that language of poetry. See, I am speaking about English poetry and poetry in general also. See, in the history of poetry, we can see that. With the advent of Romanticism, actually there was a great thinking of poetic language. See, poetry, I told you already that poetry is a linguistic structure. It is a structure of language. It is something a linguistic construct, a language construct. Still, Romanticism had pondered over much on this poetic language, aspects of poetic language, especially Wordsworth. He even tried to alter the classical approach to language, medieval approach to all these things. He said that poetic language should be as a man speaking to a man. Rural folks, sentiments, emotions, subjective feelings, individual approaches, common man's thinking, all these things should be accommodated in poetry. That was the approach of Wordsworth. And it is evident, you know that Wordsworth and Coleridge together published in 1798 lyrical ballads. Lyricism plus ballad, folk songs. But later Coleridge deviated from this approach. He said that poetic language is something separate. It is not ordinary language. It is not in the manner of a man speaking to a man. Poetic language is always something special. But after Romanticism, when modernism comes, again their change happened. Eliot and others argued that poetic language should be impersonal. No subjective feeling. Poetry is not an old sack to fill all your emotions, feelings, all these things. No. Poetry is an escape from emotion, he even argued. And he argued that all these things you know well. Is that tradition is there? All these things impersonal. Anyway, we need, in the conception of poetic language, actually we can take one aspect, that is the impersonal theory of poetry. Poets' individuality is not at all a main concern in poetry. That was the approach of Eliot. That is why he argued that poetry is an escape from emotion. But later poets, Dylan Thomas and others, after modernism, Confucian poets, all these poets, Dylan Thomas, Sylvia Plath, all these poets are there. Tom Gunn, Ted Hughes, all these English poets. They have challenged Eliot's opinion. They said that poetry should contain emotion. They argued that we don't say it is a spontaneous overflow of emotion or emotion recollected. No. But even when it is the cry of its occasion, Wallace Stevens said poetry is the cry of its occasion. Then Dylan Thomas mainly objected to T.S. Eliot and said that poetry is not an escape from emotion, but poetry should contain emotion. Poetry is a space for emotion also. See, in modern semiotics, earlier I said that structuralism was a development in the case of literary theory, and semiotics was a further development of structuralism. There are so many writers. I am not quoting all the writers. It is not necessary because this is not a class. Anyhow, semiotics, the science of science, science of science. There are variations even. In Europe, when they follow Saussurean linguistics, in America, United States of America, they followed Pearson's linguistics. All these differences are there. But what will be the differences? It is evident that language, with the advent of semiotics and later development in paradigm theory, theories of paradigm. Even I have coined an idiom, emotional paradigm, for the critical canon. Emotional paradigm. That means a social history of emotion is always there. When you read a poem, when we consider a poem, we are not considering poem alone. A lot of history, a lot of things come along with this poem. But you know that formalists actually objected to this aspect. Formalist people said that in close reading, detachment, they have approved two things, close reading and detachment. They have concentrated only on theme, only on form, not theme. And defamiliarization. They have argued for a poetic language defamiliarization. It is evident. Famous formalists, Victor Sholotsky and Roman Jakobson, they have argued for even defamiliarization, making straight. Actually, their argument of defamiliarization is the very core of poetic language. That means poetic language is not something given as such, but using the main language, using the common language, ordinary language, poets are defamiliarizing this aspect of language. And this we can connect it to the great theory of poetry, that is paradox. Cleon Brooks and others in America actually raised a new theory in accordance, joining and disjoining with the formalism, that poetry speaks the language of paradox. Paradox means against common expectation. That is the meaning. So paradoxical language. They have even shown metaphysical poets, all this. Even Pushkin, Alexander Pushkin's poetry, Victor Shklovsky hailed it too much. That embedded language. He used the phrase embedded language. Actually, Pushkin's embedded language has been under suspicion. Under suspicion. That means Stalin's government actually suspected this embedded language. But that is politics. I am not coming for that. Anyway, the politics of poetry is that rather you can discern, you can consider the politics of poetry only through the language. The main aspect of language is poetry is language. Even in modernism and even in postmodernism also. See, in postmodern concepts, how it was. See, all these romantics, formalists, all these aspects. But when we come to postmodern aspects, a great thinker from Russia, Mikhail Bakhtin, proposed. Actually, it was not postmodern theory, but we adopt it in postmodern time. That is heteroglossia. It is very important in the study of poetic language. Heteroglossia means it is a carnivalization of all aspects, slangs, dialects, whatever. Even words which are not in common use, you can use in poetry. But particular usage there should be. That means you should use the right thing in the right place, or call it such. That is why poets are always concerned about language. I think as a poet, I know that even I have to wait days and days for a particular word in a particular place. It is not, we do not get immediately. We have to even, see, in Indian concept, it is said that we have to meditate. Because according to Indian concept, poetry, all these are intuitive knowledge, part of intuitive knowledge. So we have to meditate for apt words. And that is the practice in Indian poetics. I think you know that Indian poetic tradition mainly concerned with philosophy, but concerned about philosophical connotations anyway. But as you know, when we come to see, even in postmodern, I told you heteroglossia. See, a great critic, Barry Lewis, is a postmodern critic. Actually, his approach to postmodernism, and he even titled one essay as "Word Salad Days." WRD, word salad, SALAD, salad days. That means salad is not a confluenced curry. even though it is delicious. Even when you prepare a salad out of carrot or whatever be, cucumber, chili, whatever be, onion, all these things. But still you keep identity. That means still each vegetable keeps its identity within this delicious item. That is not the case of other curries. So that is why Bahari Lewis said that is words salad dice. It is applicable to poetry also. See, even we can say in Joseph Square, I am reading all these poems when I have the time. See, so many modern usages are used by poets. See, I have even read a poem recently. This number does not exist. Copying a current situation, current context. A regular reply in mobile phone. But I have applied in the absence of a person, that in the pandemic or something like that. Anyhow, so a poetic language is a separate entity. See, I think Christian Marx, his famous book, Language of Film, I think, from my memory, I say. In that book, he has given his deliberations on the language of film. And he said that, he argued that film language is a separate language. It is not the language of literature. It is not the language of poetry. It is not the language of fiction. It is a separate language, particular language, significant in its own approach and its own articulations. So, rather, just like we can say, poetic language is also a particular language. It speaks its own notions. It is made in its own style, form, theme, rhythm, figure of speech, whatever be. It speaks its own language. I think we can take the cue from W.B. Yeats, famous Irish poet. Sorry, a poem written on W.B. Yeats, in memory of W.B. Yeats, written by another poet, English poet W.H. Auden. His famous poem, in memory of the most beautiful poem ever written in English, in memory of W.B. Yeats. In that poem, W.H. Auden argues that, rather writes that, poetry makes nothing happen. It executes in the value of its own language. Very apt. See, I think Auden's line we can consider along with the aspect of the peculiarity, the significance of the particularity of poetic language. Poetry makes nothing happen. Poetry is not for anything else. Poetry is for poetry. Why? Because it survives, it executes in its own language. Poetically, Auden writes that it executes in the value of its own language or something like that. But we can consider these aspects. Why? Because even when you have themes, see, I think from the very beginning of poetry, this question is discussed, still not settled. What is poetic language? Considering aspects of language, we say that it is linguistic structure, whatever. Sound scheme, okay. Thematic, agreed. Form, very good. But still we have the question, which is more important, theme or form? Actually, this question is out of place, because it is nonsense to ask such a question on poetry, because I told you already that poetry is a produce in its own making. It uses its own language. It uses its own rhythm. It echoes its own aspects. The inner rhythm. When you read a poem, you are not reading poem in the outer space of the form. Rather, we are reading the form in the inner space. Sometimes we will communicate with the interiority of the poet also. Some sort of interiorization happens in the writing of the poem, and when we read it, we have the same feeling. That is the effect of poetic language. So I think there are so many definitions here, so many approaches, especially in the post-structural scenario. We can see that approaches to language also redefined. Thereby, approaches to poetic language is also redefined. Recently, I have read a poem. Actually, the poem arrived in New York Times or something like that. I have got it through Google. Actually, when we read the poem, first we do not get the idea of what the poem speaks. I am not quoting the poem as such, but I can reductively paraphrase it. Poem starts in this way. I am not a new person here. I am here for such a long time. I know where the flower is. I know where the coffee table. I know who are coming here and go. I know the words. I know the exclamations. I know the reverberations. I know the echoes. I know the language. In that way, the poem continues. And when we come to the close of the poem, at the end of the poem, we understand that the poem is about a housemaid, a home servant. But never it is given. Rather, the poem starts with no such idea. Actually, it is like a monologue. I know everything here. But the poet cleverly put some hints within the structure. That means when we read the poem second time, we understand that even though the speaker, rather than narrator, the protagonist in the poem, narrates his or her experience in the place home or something, but never it is given as home. From the images, we understand that it is about a home. But the poet puts some hints here and there. And when we reread the poem, taking out these images, symbols, not symbols, images and metaphors, we understand that actually he has a problem of belonging. She can do anything here because she is a maid there. It is not given the poem, we understand. Rather, we read so. But ultimately, she understands that none of the things belong to her. All these things belong to other person. There is another owner. See, a famous poet in Malayalam, my language, a famous poet, Ayyappa Panikar. I don't know how many of you have heard about it. He wrote a wonderful poem on a car driver, a taxi driver. Only a small poem. In the poem, it is given that I am the owner of this car. I drive myself this car. You know, I have every freedom to drive this car. And in the back seat, there is a person, and who is the owner of this car. But I have the freedom to run this car. So the helplessness, the devastated life of a taxi driver is beautifully conceived in the poem. Because the helplessness. He is nothing in the car because the car owned to another person. He is only a driver. But he drives the car saying that I own this car. For what? For when? For what? For the time. Which time? In the driving time. That is the thing. See how wonderfully the poet conceives the idea. All these things you know that. Rather, usually we say in the old language, using a phrase before postmodern concept, metaphorical. Language of poetry is metaphorical, we say, in the earlier time. But in the postmodern time, this idea changed. Now, metaphor is not necessary. It is not necessary to make metaphor, but you can write poems without metaphor. Rather, using the idea of parody. See, Mikhail Bakhtin, great Russian thinker, in his narrative discourses, he argued that every literary form is a parodying of life. See, when you put a thing in a line of a poem, you are parodying a life situation, but parodied in a particular language. That is only the difference. So then we can connect this idea to the original idea of language. That means language is real. Even our thought needs a language. For example, before writing a poem, some thinking is necessary. Rather, when the first inspiration comes with the help of imagination. But immediately the problem arises. What are the thoughts to be comprised within the poem? But you know that the very thought needs a language. The thoughts will happen only in a language. So that is the importance of poetic language. I think modern times, for example, see, I am greatly acquainted with English poetry. That is why I have used English poetry. But other poetry also, for example, modern French poem. Even a lot of writers from Philippines now. Even East Asian countries, South Asian countries like Sri Lanka, even Nepal, India itself, even though they have their own Englishes, there are some certain differences in their usage or idiomatic structure. But still, we have so many writers from all these countries, Caribbean, African, Afro-American. I think in this group even we have Afro-American poets. Poet from Italy. There are good writers from Italy in this group. Fine writers from India even in this group, America, Britain, all these things. But I have taken some examples from English because I am greatly acquainted with English poetry. That is why I have used that. I think I can conclude this deliberation with a simple note on the thing I have first used. The paradigm theory. See, after metaphor, see, imagism happened in America. Ezra Pound, great poet Ezra Pound started images. Imagism, images. Within a tick, you got an idea. You get an idea. That is image. Metaphor. That is metaphorically conceived thing. All these things are there. But how will you accommodate emotion in poetry is a great question. I told you, in Romanticism, there was overflowing of emotions. In modernism, there was an escape from emotion. In between modernism and postmodernism, there are confusion poets like Dylan Thomas and other new poets. They have argued for a rich content of emotion in the poetry. But still we have the question, how will you connect this poetry rather with the emotion? But my answer is that you can connect emotion only paradigmatically. Paradigmatic presentation, paradigmatic delineation is the only way to accommodate, to conceive emotion in poetry. Then with that note, I think I can conclude this session. What is this emotional paradigm? See, I have called this approach, this aspect as emotional paradigm. Emotional paradigm means a paradigm which use emotions. But you know that is very difficult to present emotion paradigmatically. But characters in a play or fiction, events in a poem, moments in a poem, all these things, when you attach these things with certain emotions, any emotion, you can conceive in the modern times, the present time, the contemporary time, only through paradigmatic presentation. That means it is definitely it is different from symbols or metaphor or something like that. See, when you read a poem, you can see that there may be symbols. Of course, there may be metaphors. Agreed. But when you have emotion, the very question arises: how poet induce emotion in a particular moment, in a particular line, in a particular presentation in a poem? My answer is that only through paradigmatic presentation you can conceive emotion in poetry nowadays. Because all the approach, all doing, that means just like taking all the emotions and putting in that. No, it is not so. Because that much emotion we do not have nowadays. Rather, emotion we have so many emotions. And when you try to present this emotion, rather when you try to conceive this emotion, we have the feeling that we are conceiving this emotion in a poetic line for reading purpose. Reader's response is important. So, there is a meeting point of the conceiving of emotion and its effect in the mind of the reader. So that is why I told you already that the inner mind, the interiority is exposed and it is communicated and transmitted to the innermost plane of the reader. That's the communication between the inner minds. See, in Indian poetic theory, there is a theory of rasa. I don't know how many of you have heard of that. Rasa means only a sentiment, that's sentiment. Rasa theory, this approach is well established even from before AD. So that is the effect of emotion. Emotion, I think, rather I agree that we cannot do away with emotion. Emotion is necessary. But how far you can structurally knit this emotion in poetry. That is the challenge of a poet. Romantic people have answers. They have directly included all these emotions. But nowadays it is difficult to direct compilation of emotion. But those poets who accommodate emotions in their lines, poetic lines, poetry, and when a reader read the poem, when these emotions are reproduced, rather reverberated in the mind of the reader, when they have the feeling that when they have the feeling that they have felt something, then only we can say the poem is victorious, successful. For that, I think a paradigmatic presentation is necessary. And I think I was speaking about all these things. I have started my talk with language, and I haven't deliberated much because all of you have understanding of poetry, language, all these things. Anyhow, I was trying to go into the intricacy of poetry and language, rather an interface of poetry and language. So I am concluding my talk again quoting from a formalist writer, Roman Jakobson, that poetry is basically a linguistic structure. Thank you.